Yo, what's up everyone? Patrick here, and moving on to the next problem. So we're given the revenue and cost functions below. So notice revenue is 16x and then the cost is equal to 13x plus 36,000. And that x is the number of units of a certain product that's sold. And we have to find the number of units sold, or we have to solve for x, when the company goes through these three different scenarios. So number one, if it breaks even. Number two, if it has a profit of 18,000, and then number three, if it has a profit margin of 15%. So first thing I'm going to do before getting into the specific scenarios is I'm actually going to take this and create a profit function. You don't necessarily have to, but because I feel like we're going to be using profit multiple times in these scenarios, let's just create a function for it. And we know profit is what? Just in general, it's revenue minus costs. So what we can do is we could take the revenue function, 16x, and we could subtract the cost function. Now, because there's multiple expressions for the cost function, make sure that you're putting that in brackets, right? We're subtracting that whole cost. And now this costs multiple expressions, so you got to put all of that in brackets. And so from here, if we simplify this, we'd end up having this over here. So notice 16x minus 13x, that would give us 3x. Now we got minus 36,000. So the profit function, given this revenue and cost, the profit function is 3x minus 36,000. So that would give us the profit for any number of units sold. And so now, things I feel like will be much easier that we have this profit function. You don't necessarily have to have it. So for example, in scenario one, when does a company break even? Well, basically when their profit is 0 or when the revenue is equal to the cost. So we could just plug in 0 over here. But if you were to make both of these equal, right, the revenue equals the cost, 16x equals 13x plus 36,000, you would get the exact same solution. Or if you were to take this, instead of making a profit function, if you were to just take this minus all of that in brackets, make it equal to 0, as we did before, you'd still get the same solution that we're going to get. So there's multiple ways to go about this. Personally, I just felt like creating a profit function was easier for the whole question. So from here, to solve for x, bring the 36,000, the negative 36,000 over, divide both sides by 3, so x would be 12,000. So that's the number of units sold when the company is going to break even, right? That's when the revenue is going to be the cost. You could check it. You could take this, plug it in here, and then those values would equal. Another thing you want to be careful of is what the question is asking for. So here they're asking for the number of units sold, which is 12,000. That's the answer for number one. But they may ask, what is the revenue when the company breaks even? So we'd follow the same steps here, but then we'd have to take this 12,000 and plug it in here. Or maybe they'll ask, what is the cost when the company breaks even? We take the 12,000, plug it in here. Right? So just be really careful with what the question is asking. Right? So 12,000 is the answer to question one. Now, question two is asking, what's the number of units sold when the company has a profit of 18,000? Well, just plug in 18,000 for the profit. Bring this over. 18,000 plus 36,000 would give us 54,000. Divide both sides by 3. And then over here, x would end up being what? X would end up being 18,000. Right? So that's what the number of units sold would be. And it's just a coincidence, actually, that 18,000, the number of units sold, is the exact same as the profit. Usually that's not going to happen, right? Both of these numbers are usually going to be different, but in this case, it's just a coincidence that they are both the same, right? So that's the number of units sold to get a profit of 18,000. Now, number 3, actually I feel like number 3 is the trickiest one. They're asking, what's the number of units sold when the company has a profit margin of 15%? Now, profit margin, what is that? Well, it's the ratio or the percentage of profit of revenue. So it's basically profit over revenue. Or if you're going into accounting terminology, sometimes you'll see this net income over revenue, or net income over sales, or earnings over revenue. Here we'll just leave it as profit over revenue. So basically that ratio of both of these, 3x minus 36,000 over, that's the profit, over the revenue, 16x, has to equal 15%. Now, if you wanted to have this as a percentage, you'd multiply this by 100, because this is going to be a decimal over here. Notice that the profit always has to be less than or equal to the revenue, so this is going to be a smaller number over a bigger number, which is going to give you a decimal. So this is going to be a decimal over here. So we got to take this 15% and convert it to decimals, 0.15, like that. And so from here, we have this equation to solve. So it's a little bit more complex than the other two. But nevertheless, it's not too bad. What we can do is we could just put this over 1, cross multiply. So 1 times this whole expression would just leave that whole expression. And then 16 times 0.15, that would give us 2.4. And that's going to be x, like that. Bring the 2.4x over, bring the negative 36,000 over. So 3x minus 2.4x would give us 0.6x. That's going to be 36,000. Divide both sides by 0.6. X would end up being 60,000. Right, so that's the number of units sold if the company has a profit margin of 15%. All right, so this kind of question, if they give you a revenue and cost function, different kinds of questions they can ask you when it breaks even, or they'll give you a specific profit, or sometimes it'll be a little bit more complex and they'll give you a profit margin.